The distant wail of a train whistle pierced the suffocating stillness of an August afternoon in 1876. As Sophia Pierce clutched her weathered satchel and stepped onto the dusty platform of Cooper's Ridge, Montana. Blood and soot still stained the hem of her once beautiful blue dress, a stark reminder of everything she had fled. Her throat burned with each breath, not from the dry summer heat, but from the smoke that had stolen her voice just 3 nights prior. The doctor back in St. Louis had been clear. She might never speak again. Sophia's gloved hand instinctively moved to the thin scarf wrapped around her neck, concealing the angry red marks that told a story she could no longer voice. 22 years of life, and now silence would be her only language. Her emerald eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, scanned the unfamiliar town, her last chance at starting over. Miss Pierce. A stout woman with graying hair approached, waving a small handwritten sign. "I'm Mrs. Holloway from the telegram. Welcome to Cooper's Ridge." Sophia nodded politely, producing a small notebook from her pocket. With practiced efficiency, she scribbled a brief message. "Thank you for meeting me." The journey was long. Mrs. Holloway's eyes widened slightly as she read. "Oh my, they didn't mention, well, no matter. The boarding house is just this way. My brother's mercantile has been looking for help with bookkeeping, just as you inquired. Quite fortunate timing." As they walked through the main street, Sophia noted the typical frontier establishments: a general store, saloon, small church, and sheriff's office. Cooper's Ridge was precisely what she had hoped for. Small enough to disappear into, yet established enough to offer employment for a woman with her skills. What she hadn't counted on was the tall figure emerging from the livery stable, a man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. His worn leather chaps and sun-darkened skin marked him as a working cowboy, but something in his bearing suggested more. "That's Xavier Vance," Mrs. Holloway whispered, following Sophia's gaze. "Owns the Double V Ranch just north of town. Lost his wife and child to fever 3 years back. Keeps to himself mostly, except when he brings cattle to market or comes in for supplies." Sophia quickly averted her eyes when the cowboy glanced their way, but not before noticing the intensity of his gaze, deep blue eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. A shiver ran through her, though whether from fear or something else entirely, she couldn't say. Xavier Vance had indeed noticed the newcomer. It was impossible not to. Cooper's Ridge rarely saw new faces, especially not one so clearly out of place. Even from a distance, he could tell she wasn't frontier-born. Something about the way she carried herself spoke of Eastern refinement, despite the obvious travel-worn appearance. "New school teacher?" he asked Dan Holloway as he paid for feed. "Bookkeeper for the mercantile, I hear. My sister's taking her to the boarding house now." Dan counted out Xavier's change. "Name's Sophia Pierce. From back east somewhere." Xavier nodded, his curiosity satisfied for the moment. He had enough concerns with the ranch and the approaching fall roundup. A city woman coming to try her hand at frontier life was nothing new. Most lasted a season before returning east, broken by the harshness of Montana territory. "Weather's turning early this year," he commented, changing the subject. "Might want to stock extra supplies for winter." He tipped his hat to Dan and stepped back into the street, leading his horse toward the general store. As he crossed the dusty thoroughfare, his path intersected with Mrs. Holloway and the newcomer. Up close, he noticed what he hadn't from a distance: a fragility about her, yet also a determination in the set of her shoulders. "Mrs. Holloway," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Cooper's Ridge, madam." He directed this to Sophia with a brief nod. Sophia looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. She inclined her head in acknowledgement but offered no verbal response. Mrs. Holloway quickly filled the silence. "This is Miss Sophia Pierce, Mr. Vance. She's come to work for my brother at the Mercantile." Xavier waited for the customary pleasantries, but the woman merely held his gaze, something unspoken in her eyes. The moment stretched uncomfortably before Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat. "Miss Pierce lost her voice in an accident," she explained in a hushed tone. "She communicates through writing." Understanding dawned, and Xavier's expression softened imperceptibly. "Cooper's Ridge is pleased to have you, Miss Pierce," he said, his tone losing some of its earlier reserve. "If you need anything, the Double V Ranch is always willing to help newcomers." Sophia reached for her notebook, quickly writing a message and turning it toward him. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Vance." The simple words were beautifully formed, the penmanship revealing an educated background. Xavier found himself curious about what circumstances had brought her here, what accident had stolen her voice, and why she'd chosen this remote corner of Montana to start anew. "Good day, ladies," he said, breaking the moment and continuing toward the general store. Sophia watched him go, struck by the gentle consideration in his manner. In her experience, men often became uncomfortable around any form of disability, especially in a woman. His direct gaze and natural response had been unexpected. "Mrs. Holloway guided her toward a modest two-story building with a small sign identifying it as Holloway Boarding House. "He's a good man, Mr. Vance," she said as they climbed the steps. "Too solitary for his own good since the tragedy, but respected by everyone in the county. Now, let's get you settled." The room was simple but clean: a narrow bed, washstand, small writing desk, and a window overlooking the main street. For Sophia, it represented safety. No one here knew her past. No one would look at her with pity or suspicion. The silence that had been forced upon her could become a shield rather than a burden. She unpacked her few belongings and changed into a fresh dress before returning downstairs to meet the other boarders: an elderly schoolteacher, a young clerk from the bank, and the town seamstress. Mrs. Holloway had clearly informed them of her condition, as no one expressed surprise when she used her notebook to introduce herself. That night, as she prepared for bed, Sophia stood at the window, watching as the town settled into evening quietude. A lone figure caught her attention: Xavier Vance, mounting his horse outside the saloon. Even in the dim light of dusk, his silhouette was unmistakable. He paused, looking up at the boarding house windows, and for a brief moment, Sophia was certain he could see her watching. She stepped back into the shadows, her heart inexplicably racing. Tomorrow she would begin her new position at the Mercantile. Tomorrow she would truly start her new life. She would not allow herself to be distracted by a cowboy with kind eyes, no matter how they had seemed to understand the language of her silence. Xavier rode the 5 miles back to his ranch under a canopy of stars, his thoughts repeatedly returning to the woman with the silent voice but speaking eyes. There had been pain there, and secrets he recognized both all too well. Cooper's Ridge was too small a town not to cross paths with her again, but he reminded himself that he had no business involving himself in another's troubles. His foreman, Samuel, was waiting when he arrived home. "Telegram came," he said, handing over the folded paper. "From that cattle buyer in Billings," Xavier read it quickly. "They'll take the whole herd if we can deliver by the end of September. That's cutting it close with the weather. It's a good price. We'll manage." Xavier dismounted, patting his horse's neck. "Start organizing the hands tomorrow. We'll need to begin the roundup within the week." Samuel nodded and headed toward the bunkhouse, leaving Xavier alone on the porch of the main house, a house too large and too empty for a single man. He'd built it for Amanda, with rooms for the children they'd planned to have. Now only his footsteps echoed through its halls. He shook off the familiar melancholy and went inside. There was work to be done, a ranch to run, men who depended on him for their livelihood. The city woman with the silent voice had no place in these considerations. Yet as he lay in bed that night, it was her eyes he remembered, eyes that held volumes of unspoken words. The following morning, Sophia reported to the Mercantile promptly at 8. Harold Holloway, a practical man with a head for business, showed her the ledgers with minimal explanation. "My sister tells me you worked in a bank back east," he said, watching as she examined the books. Sophia nodded, writing quickly. 5 years as an assistant bookkeeper at First National Bank of St. Louis. Good enough for me. Our last girl married a miner and moved to Helena. Books have been neglected for nearly a month. He left her to her work, and Sophia gratefully immersed herself in the familiar world of numbers and accounts. Here, her silence was no impediment. The ledgers spoke a language she understood perfectly, and by midday, she had already identified several discrepancies and organized a more efficient system. The bell above the door jingled continuously as customers came and went. Sophia kept to her corner desk, invisible to most as they conducted their business. Until he walked in, Xavier Vance's presence seemed to fill the small store. He nodded to Harold before his eyes found Sophia at her desk. He approached, removing his hat. "Miss Pierce, settling in well?" Sophia wrote quickly. "Very well, thank you. Mr. Holloway has been kind." Xavier studied the neat handwriting. "Glad to hear it. I'm placing a large order today, fall supplies for the ranch. Might be easier if I write it out rather than having Harold run back and forth to you with each item." She pushed a blank sheet toward him, and their fingers brushed momentarily. Sophia withdrew her hand as if burned, a flush rising to her cheeks. Xavier pretended not to notice as he began listing his requirements: flour, coffee, sugar, tobacco for the hands, ammunition, medical supplies, and dozens of other necessities for a ranch preparing for winter. As he wrote, he spoke casually. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you're from St. Louis. Big change coming to Montana territory." Sophia hesitated, then wrote beneath his list, "Sometimes change is necessary." "That it is." He finished his list and slid it back to her. "Will you be staying through winter? It can be harsh for those not accustomed." "I have nowhere else to go." The words appeared on her paper before she could consider their implication. She quickly crossed them out, replacing them with, "I intend to make Cooper's Ridge my home." Xavier's expression revealed nothing, but his eyes lingered on the crossed-out words. "Winter's easier with good company," he said finally. "Church socials, quilting bees for the ladies. Town pulls together when the snows come." Sophia nodded, not trusting herself to write more. Something about this man made her feel exposed, as if he could read far more than the words she put to paper. Harold returned then, and Xavier discussed delivery arrangements for his order. When he finally turned to leave, he paused by Sophia's desk. "There's a town gathering Saturday evening. Harvest celebration at the church. Might be a good opportunity to meet more folks." He replaced his hat. "Good day, Miss Pierce." After he left, Sophia found herself staring at the door long after it closed behind him. His invitation, if that's what it had been, unsettled her. She had come to Cooper's Ridge to disappear, not to socialize. The idea of attending a gathering where her silence would be conspicuous filled her with dread. Yet, as the week progressed, Mrs. Holloway and the other boarders spoke of nothing else. It seemed the harvest celebration was the social event of the season, with families coming from outlying homesteads and ranches to join the festivities. "You simply must attend." Mrs. Holloway insisted over dinner Friday evening. "Everyone will be there, and it's the perfect opportunity for you to become part of the community." Sophia had smiled noncommittally, but later that night, she found herself examining her limited wardrobe. She had only one dress suitable for a social occasion, a modest navy blue gown with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It had been packed away at the bottom of her trunk, a remnant of her former life. Saturday evening arrived clear and cool, with the first hints of autumn coloring the distant mountains. Despite her reservations, Sophia found herself walking with Mrs. Holloway and the other boarders toward the church, where lanterns illuminated a large open area set up with tables and a makeshift dance floor. The gathering was already in full swing, with a local fiddle player providing lively music. Children ran laughing between the tables, women displayed their best dishes for the communal supper, and men gathered in clusters, discussing cattle prices and weather predictions. Sophia felt the weight of curious glances as Mrs. Holloway introduced her around. Though everyone was welcoming, she couldn't miss the pitying looks when her condition was explained, the awkward pauses as people realized she couldn't respond verbally to their questions. She was considering an early retreat when Xavier appeared at her side, a plate of food in hand. "Evening, Miss Pierce. Thought you might be hungry." He offered the plate with a simple directness that somehow eased her discomfort. Sophia accepted with a grateful nod, reaching for her ever-present notebook. "No need," Xavier said, surprising her. "Simple nod or shake will do for now. Seems impractical to have you writing while trying to eat." His practical consideration brought a genuine smile to her face. She nodded again, and they moved to a quieter table at the edge of the gathering. "Not much for crowds myself," Xavier commented as they sat. "Ranch keeps me busy enough that I don't make it to town events often." Sophia tilted her head in question, wondering why he'd come tonight. Xavier seemed to understand. Felt it important to support the community. Good for morale before winter sets in. He paused. "And I admit to some curiosity about how you were adjusting." His honesty was refreshing. Most men she'd known would have offered flattery or false pretenses. Sophia reached for her notebook, feeling his simple statement deserved a proper response. "The town has been welcoming. The work suits me. It's peaceful here." "Peaceful now," Xavier agreed. "Winter brings its own challenges." They were interrupted by Reverend Thomas, a kindly older man who served as both minister and unofficial mayor of Cooper's Ridge. "Mr. Vance, good to see you in town. And Miss Pierce, we're so pleased you could join us." He beamed at them both. "I've been telling everyone about the fine job you're doing organizing the mercantile books. Harold says you've already saved him from several costly errors." Sophia smiled her thanks, but she noticed Xavier watching her with heightened interest. "Miss Pierce has a talent with numbers, then?" he asked the Reverend, though his eyes remained on Sophia. "Indeed. Harold says she's the most efficient bookkeeper he's ever employed. A blessing for our little community." After the Reverend moved on to greet other attendees, Xavier turned back to her. "Impressive. Most ranch operations could benefit from such skills." "I find comfort in the orderliness of numbers," she wrote. "They remain constant when little else does." Xavier nodded slowly. Truth in that. He seemed about to say more when the music changed to a slower melody. Around them, couples moved to the dance floor. To Sophia's surprise, Xavier stood and extended his hand. "Would you care to dance, Miss Pierce?" Panic flashed across her features. She hadn't danced since before. She quickly wrote, "I couldn't possibly. How would we communicate?" "Some things don't need words," he replied, his hand still outstretched. "Just follow my lead." Something in his steady gaze gave her courage. She placed her notebook on the table and took his offered hand, allowing him to guide her to the edge of the dance floor. His hand at her waist was respectful, maintaining proper distance. Yet Sophia felt acutely aware of his touch. As they began to move in time with the music, she kept her eyes downcast, concentrating on following his steps. "You've danced before," Xavier observed quietly. Recently, she shook her head, finally meeting his eyes. Before the accident, a nod, accompanied by a shadow crossing her features. Xavier's hand tightened slightly at her waist, steadying her. "We all have befores and afters, Miss Pierce. The divide between can seem impossible to cross." His words resonated with unexpected truth. Sophia found herself studying his face more intently, seeing beyond the weathered exterior to the understanding in his eyes. This man knew loss intimately. As the music continued, they moved together with increasing ease, finding a wordless rhythm. For those few minutes, Sophia forgot her silence, forgot the stares of the townspeople, forgot everything except the secure guidance of Xavier's hands and the unexpected connection forming between them. When the music ended, he led her back to their table, retrieving her notebook for her. "Thank you for the dance," he said simply. "Thank you for asking," she wrote, then hesitated before adding, "Few would bother with a woman who cannot even express gratitude properly." Xavier read her words with a frown. "There's nothing improper about your gratitude, Miss Pierce. Some of the most important things are expressed without words." The evening continued with more music and conversation. Sophia found herself relaxing as Xavier remained by her side, somehow making her silence seem less conspicuous. He had a talent for asking questions that required only simple gestures to answer, or that she could respond to with brief written replies. As the gathering began to disperse, Xavier offered to walk her back to the boarding house. The night air had grown chilly, and without asking, he placed his coat around her shoulders. "Winter comes early to these mountains," he said as they walked. "Another month and we'll likely see first snow." Sophia nodded, pulling the coat closer. It carried his scent: leather, pine, and open air. At the boarding house steps, she returned his coat and reached for her notebook. "Thank you for your kindness tonight. It meant more than I can express." Xavier read her words thoughtfully. "I'll be bringing cattle to market next week. Perhaps I could call on you if that would be agreeable." Sophia stared at him in surprise. No one in Cooper's Ridge had sought out her company specifically, except for work matters. She hadn't expected anyone would, given her condition. "I would like that," she wrote finally, her handwriting betraying a slight tremor. "Good night then, Miss Pierce." He tipped his hat and waited until she was safely inside before turning away. Sophia climbed the stairs to her room in a daze, uncertain of what had just transpired. Had Xavier Vance, the most respected rancher in the county, actually asked to call on her? A woman who couldn't even speak, who carried secrets too dark to share. She stood at her window, watching his tall figure disappear down the darkened street. Dangerous, she thought. Dangerous to allow anyone close enough to see beyond the silence to the truth. The following week passed in a blur of routine. Sophia threw herself into her work at the mercantile, reorganizing the inventory system and updating all the ledgers. Harold Holloway was openly impressed, mentioning that business had never run so smoothly. "You're a godsend, Miss Pierce," he declared on Friday afternoon. "I've increased orders by 15%, and we're still keeping better track than before." Sophia smiled her thanks, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Xavier had mentioned bringing cattle to market next week, but the week was nearly over with no sign of him. She chided herself for the disappointment. A busy rancher had more important concerns than keeping social engagements with a mute bookkeeper. She was preparing to close the shop when the door opened, bringing with it the crisp October air and Xavier Vance. His clothing was trail-worn, face shadowed with stubble, but his eyes brightened when they landed on her. "Miss Pierce, apologies for the delay." Trail was harder than expected with the early cold. Sophia hurriedly wrote, "No apology needed. I hope the drive was successful." "Successful enough. Cattle prices are holding steady." He removed his hat, revealing hair flattened by days beneath it. "I'm not fit for proper company at the moment, but I wondered if you might consider a ride tomorrow. Weather's supposed to be fair, and there's a spot not far from town I thought you might appreciate." She hesitated. A proper lady would decline an invitation to go riding alone with a man. But Sophia had left propriety behind in the ashes of St. Louis. "I would enjoy that, though I must admit I'm not an experienced rider." "Got a gentle mare that would suit you. I can collect you at 10 if that's convenient," Sophia nodded, ignoring the voice of caution in her mind. One afternoon couldn't hurt, and the prospect of escaping town, even briefly, was too tempting to resist. Xavier's expression softened. "Until tomorrow, then." After he left, Sophia found herself smiling as she completed the day's closing tasks. The prospect of tomorrow's outing had lifted her spirits in a way nothing had since her arrival in Cooper's Ridge. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect riding weather. Sophia dressed carefully in her sturdiest skirt and boots, adding a warm jacket and gloves. "Mrs. Holloway raised an eyebrow at her attire over breakfast but made no comment. Xavier arrived precisely at 10, leading 2 horses. The mare he'd brought for Sophia was a dappled gray with a gentle eye. "This is Willow," he said, helping Sophia mount. "She's steady as they come." Once they were both mounted, Xavier led them north out of town. Sophia quickly grew comfortable in the saddle, finding Willow responsive to the lightest touch. The landscape opened before them, rolling grasslands giving way to pine-covered foothills, with the mountains rising majestically beyond. They rode in companionable silence for nearly an hour before Xavier guided them toward a small rise crowned with a cluster of cottonwood trees. A creek bubbled nearby, and the view extended for miles in every direction. "Thought we might stop here," he said, dismounting and coming to help her down. His hands at her waist were steady and strong, lifting her effortlessly. Sophia's breath caught as their eyes met, sudden awareness passing between them. Xavier stepped back, clearing his throat. "Brought some coffee and food if you're hungry." She nodded, retrieving her notebook from her saddlebag. "It's beautiful here. Thank you for showing me." They settled beneath the largest cottonwood, where Xavier spread a blanket and unpacked a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. He built a small fire and set coffee to brew, his movements efficient from years of trail experience. "Found this spot my first year in Montana," he said as they ate. "Come here sometimes to think. Not many places with a view like this." Sophia gazed across the vast landscape, understanding why he valued it. The enormity of the country spread before them made human concerns seem small by comparison. "How long have you been in Montana?" she wrote. 12 years now. Came west after the war with nothing but a horse and determination. Worked cattle drives, saved enough to homestead, eventually bought neighboring claims as folks gave up and moved on." His voice held neither pride nor boast, simply stating facts. "The Double V is over 10,000 acres now." "Impressive accomplishment," Xavier shrugged. "Got lucky with timing." Land was cheap, cattle prices good. Right place, right time. Sophia sensed there was more to the story than luck, but she didn't press. Instead, she wrote, "Do you ever miss your home? Before Montana." A shadow crossed his face. "Virginia stopped being home when the war destroyed everything my family built. Some places you can't go back to, even if they still exist." His words resonated deeply with Sophia. She stared at her notebook, debating how much to reveal. I understand. St. Louis holds nothing for me now. Xavier studied her face. The fire that took your voice, it took more than that, didn't it? Sophia's hand trembled slightly as she wrote. It took everything. My home, my security, my future as I had imagined it. Not your courage, though, Xavier said quietly. Takes considerable strength to start over in a place like this. His perception unsettled her. Sophia had grown accustomed to people seeing only her disability, not the determination behind it. Necessity, not courage, she corrected. They're often the same thing. Xavier poured more coffee for them both. Most folks running from something end up in places like Cooper's Ridge. Doesn't mean they're all brave enough to make a real life here. Are you running from something, Mr. Vance? The directness of her question surprised them both. Xavier's expression grew pensive as he considered his answer. Not running, more like searching, for peace maybe. After Amanda and the baby died, Virginia felt hollow, thought Montana might have enough space to contain the emptiness. The raw honesty of his words touched something in Sophia. Before she could reconsider, she was writing. The fire wasn't an accident. It was set deliberately, by a man I refused to marry. Xavier's face hardened as he read. This man, he's still in St. Louis, Sophia nodded, then wrote. He believes I died in the fire. It's safer that way. Jesus, Xavier muttered. Did the law, his father is a judge. There would have been no justice, only more danger for me. Understanding dawned in Xavier's eyes, along with anger on her behalf. So you let them think you perished and came west. The doctor who treated me helped arrange it. Said my voice might return with time, but it's been 4 months now. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, processing what she'd shared. Finally, he said, Your secret's safe with me, Sophia. No one in Cooper's Ridge needs to know more than you choose to tell them. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about hearing it in his deep voice made her heart quicken. She wrote simply, Thank you, Xavier. They sat in silence after that, watching as the afternoon light changed across the landscape. The shared confidences had shifted something between them, a bridge forming across the carefully maintained distance each had established. Eventually, Xavier began packing up their small picnic. We should start back. Days are getting shorter. The ride back to town was as quiet as the journey out, but the silence felt different now, comfortable, almost intimate. When they reached the boarding house, Xavier dismounted first, then helped Sophia down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for coming today, he said, his voice low. Would you, he paused, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. The church has a harvest supper next Saturday. Would you consider attending with me? Sophia looked up at him in surprise. An invitation to a public event as his companion would signal to the town that Xavier Vance had an interest in her. The implications made her both thrilled and terrified. Are you certain? She wrote, People will talk. Let them, he replied simply. I've never much cared for town gossip. Then yes, I would be honored. His smile transformed his features, softening the lines carved by sun and hardship. I'll call for you at 6. Sophia watched him ride away, her emotions in turmoil. She hadn't come to Cooper's Ridge looking for attachment of any kind. Entanglements meant vulnerability, and vulnerability had nearly killed her once before. Yet something about Xavier Vance made her willing to risk it, his quiet strength, his respect for her silence, the way he looked at her as if he could read the words written in her eyes. News of their planned attendance at the harvest supper spread quickly through Cooper's Ridge. Mrs. Holloway was particularly delighted, informing Sophia that Xavier hadn't escorted a woman to any social function since his wife's death. You must wear your blue dress, she insisted. With my mother's cameo at the throat, it would complement the lace beautifully. Sophia was touched by the offer and accepted gratefully. The days leading up to Saturday passed in a flurry of anticipation and doubt. Several times, she nearly wrote Xavier a note canceling their plans, but each time she reconsidered. Whatever was developing between them deserved a chance, however frightening the prospect. Saturday evening arrived with a light dusting of early snow, just enough to make the town look magical in the gathering dusk. Sophia stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing the woman reflected there. The blue dress, freshly pressed, complemented her auburn hair, which she had arranged in a simple but elegant style. Mrs. Holloway's cameo added a touch of refinement at her throat, partially concealing the scarring there when Mrs. Holloway announced Xavier's arrival. Sophia took a deep breath before descending the stairs. He stood in the entry hall, hat in hand, dressed in what was clearly his finest attire, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, crisp white shirt, and polished boots. The look in his eyes as she approached made every moment of anxiety worthwhile. "You're beautiful, Sophia," he said simply, offering his arm. The church hall had been transformed for the occasion, with autumn foliage and candles creating a warm atmosphere. As they entered, conversation momentarily halted as curious gazes turned their way. Xavier guided her through the crowd with easy confidence, greeting neighbors and introducing Sophia, as if her silent presence at his side was the most natural thing in the world. To her surprise, the evening proved enjoyable. Xavier seemed to have an intuitive understanding of when she needed her notebook and when simple gestures would suffice. He kept her plate filled during supper, engaged others in conversation that included her without demanding verbal responses, and generally created a space where her silence wasn't a barrier. After the meal, when music started for dancing, Xavier leaned close. "Would you care to dance, or would you prefer to walk outside for some air? The crowd is rather close in here." Sophia smiled gratefully at his consideration and pointed toward the door. They slipped out quietly, Xavier pausing to collect her shawl and wrap it around her shoulders as they stepped into the cool night air. The street was peaceful, illuminated by moonlight reflecting off the dusting of snow. They walked slowly, arm in arm, their breath forming small clouds in the night air. "Thank you for coming tonight," Xavier said. "Having you there made it the first social event I've genuinely enjoyed in years." Sophia stopped walking and reached for her notebook. "You made me feel normal tonight." "Do you know what a gift that is?" Xavier read her words, then met her gaze with intensity. "You are extraordinary, Sophia. Nothing about you needs fixing or changing." Something in his expression made her breath catch. They stood facing each other in the moonlight, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. Xavier slowly raised his hand to her face, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she didn't, his fingers gently traced her cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia nodded, her heart pounding. Xavier leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious, his touch reverent. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathing unevenly. Sophia reached for her notebook with trembling fingers. "I didn't come to Cooper's Ridge looking for this." "Nor I," Xavier admitted, "but here we are. It terrifies me." "Me too." His honesty was disarming. "I never expected to feel this way again, never wanted to risk it." "What do we do now?" Xavier took her hand, raising it to his lips. "We take each day as it comes. No rush, no pressure, just two people learning each other's silences." His answer was perfect, understanding her need for caution while acknowledging the undeniable connection between them. Sophia squeezed his hand in response. They walked back to the boarding house slowly, reluctant for the evening to end. At the door, Xavier kissed her once more, a gentle promise rather than a demand. "Good night, Sophia. I'll call on you tomorrow if I may." She nodded, her eyes conveying what her voice could not. As she prepared for bed that night, Sophia realized she was smiling, truly smiling for the first time in months. Whatever fears tomorrow might bring, tonight she would allow herself this simple happiness. True to his word, Xavier called the following afternoon, suggesting a walk through town. It became a pattern in the weeks that followed, riding together on Saturdays when weather permitted, attending church services on Sundays, and finding moments during the week for shared company. Cooper's Ridge quickly accepted them as a pair. If there was gossip about the silent bookkeeper and the widowed rancher, it was generally good-natured. Sophia found herself gradually embraced by the community, her notebook becoming such a familiar sight that people hardly noticed it anymore. November brought heavier snows and the beginning of true winter. Xavier worried about Sophia's comfort in the drafty boarding house and brought extra firewood and blankets on each visit. He also began bringing books, novels, poetry, historical accounts, correctly guessing that reading was one pleasure her condition hadn't affected. They often spent evenings in the boarding house parlor, reading companionably before the fire. Sometimes Xavier would read aloud, his deep voice bringing the words to life as Sophia listened, curled beside him on the sofa. It was during one such evening, as the first major blizzard of the season raged outside, that their relationship deepened further. Xavier had been reading Tennyson, but as he closed the book, his expression grew serious. "Christmas is approaching," he said. "I was wondering if you would consider spending it at the ranch. Mrs. Holloway and the other boarders are welcome too, of course." Sophia looked at him questioningly. "The ranch house stands mostly empty," he explained. "Seems a shame when it was built for family gatherings, and the roads can become impassable after heavy snow. I'd rest easier knowing you were somewhere solid and warm." Sophia considered his invitation. She knew it represented more than just practical concerns about her comfort. "Just for Christmas," she wrote. Xavier hesitated. "For as long as you wish to stay, I have plenty of room and the housekeeper would welcome the company." He took her hand. "I'm not proposing anything improper, Sophia. You'd have your own quarters, complete privacy. I've come to care for you deeply, and the thought of you isolated in town if the weather turns dangerous." His genuine concern touched her deeply. "I care for you too," she wrote, "but I value my independence. My work at the mercantile is important to me. I understand that. It's one of the things I admire most about you." He squeezed her hand. "Think about it. No need to decide tonight." The blizzard continued for 3 days, effectively cutting off Cooper's Ridge from the surrounding areas. When it finally cleared, Xavier arrived in town on a sleigh rather than horseback, bringing needed supplies and checking on the welfare of the townspeople. He found Sophia at the mercantile, where she had been stranded for one night when the storm intensified too quickly for her to safely return to the boarding house. Harold had made up a cot in the back room, but it had been cold and uncomfortable. When Xavier saw her, exhaustion evident in her face, his concern was immediate. "This is exactly what worries me," he said quietly. "Winter's barely begun and already you were at risk." Sophia sighed, knowing he was right. The practical considerations were compelling, even setting aside her growing feelings for him. "I'll come for Christmas," she wrote. "We can determine longer arrangements after that." Xavier's relief was palpable. "Thank you. I'll make the necessary preparations." The week before Christmas, Xavier arrived with the sleigh to transport Sophia and her belongings to the Double V. Mrs. Holloway and several other townspeople had accepted his invitation for Christmas Day itself, but Sophia would be staying at the ranch until at least February, when the worst of winter would be past. The ranch house was more impressive than Sophia had imagined, a substantial two-story structure built of timber and local stone, with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Inside, it was beautifully appointed with quality furnishings, many brought west from Virginia. Mrs. Guthrie, the housekeeper, greeted them warmly. She was a widow in her 50s who had been with Xavier since he built the house, and she showed Sophia to a lovely suite of rooms on the second floor. "Mr. Vance had these prepared specially," she explained, opening the door to reveal a sitting room with a bedroom beyond. A cheerful fire burned in the grate, and fresh flowers stood on the writing desk despite the winter season. Sophia was overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness. The rooms had clearly been designed for a woman's comfort, with soft furnishings and feminine touches that must have been Amanda's once. Yet Xavier had somehow made the space feel prepared for Sophia, specifically the writing desk positioned to catch the best light, bookshelves filled with volumes she had mentioned enjoying, even a small piano in the corner. When Mrs. Guthrie left her to settle in, Sophia sat at the desk and wrote a note. "These rooms are beautiful. Thank you for making me feel so welcome." She found Xavier in his study downstairs, reviewing accounts with his foreman. When she handed him the note, he dismissed the foreman with a nod. "I'm glad you approve," he said after reading her words. "I wanted you to have a space that was entirely yours." The piano was a surprise. "I haven't played in years." "You play?" Xavier looked pleased. "I didn't know it was Amanda's. I just thought it might make the room feel more complete." Sophia hesitated, then wrote, "I studied piano from childhood. Music was my first language in many ways. Would you play something? Sometime when you feel comfortable." His request was gentle, without pressure. She nodded, though the prospect filled her with both longing and fear. Music had been such an integral part of her life before. Would it now serve only as a reminder of all she had lost? That evening, after a quiet dinner with just Xavier and Mrs. Guthrie, Sophia returned to her rooms and found herself drawn to the piano. She sat on the bench, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. The familiar feel of ivory beneath her fingertips awakened muscle memory from happier times. Slowly, she began to play a simple melody at first, then gradually more complex pieces as her confidence returned. The music filled the room, flowing through her fingertips in place of the words she could no longer speak. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Xavier standing in the doorway until she finished a particularly moving Chopin nocturne. When she looked up and saw him, his expression was one of awe. "That was incredible," he said, entering the room. "Like hearing your voice." Sophia felt tears well in her eyes at his perception. He was right in the music. She had found a voice again. She gestured for him to sit beside her on the bench and began another piece, this one lighter, almost playful. Xavier watched her hands dance across the keys, mesmerized. "Will you teach me sometime? Nothing fancy, just enough to understand what you're saying when you play." She nodded, deeply moved by his desire to connect with her through music. When she finished playing, she turned to her notebook. "Music was my refuge as a child. My father was strict, often harsh, but he valued accomplishment. The piano was the one place I could express feelings that weren't permitted elsewhere." Xavier absorbed this glimpse into her past. "And now it can be again a way to speak without words. Thank you for giving this back to me. I didn't realize how much I missed it." "The house has been too quiet for too long," Xavier said. "Having your music fill these rooms feels right." As Christmas approached, the ranch became a hive of activity. Mrs. Guthrie baked continuously, filling the house with delicious aromas. Xavier and his men brought in a massive pine tree for the main parlor, and Sophia helped decorate it with ornaments carefully stored in the attic, another piece of the life Xavier had planned with Amanda. Sophia found herself wondering about the woman who should have presided over this beautiful home. One evening, as she and Xavier sat before the fire after dinner, she gathered her courage to ask, "Would you tell me about Amanda?" Xavier looked surprised but not displeased by the request. She was gentle, kind, had a laugh that could light up a room. He smiled at the memory. "We met in Virginia after the war. Her family had lost everything like mine. We decided to start fresh together in the West. She must have been very brave to undertake such a journey." She was. Never complained, even when conditions were harsh. Had a talent for making wherever we were feel like home. His expression grew sad. "The fever took her and our son so quickly. 3 days from first symptoms to—" He couldn't finish. Sophia reached for his hand, offering silent comfort. "I thought I'd never find happiness again," he continued after a moment. "Convinced myself I didn't deserve to." "What changed?" Xavier met her eyes directly. "You walked into Cooper's Ridge with your notebook and your silent courage, and suddenly the future held possibilities again." Sophia's heart raced at his words. She wrote carefully, "I feel the same. After the fire, I believed that part of my life was over the part where connection was possible. You proved me wrong." Xavier lifted her hand to his lips. "I love you, Sophia. I don't expect you to return the sentiment immediately or ever if you don't feel it, but I needed you to know." Tears filled her eyes as she took back her hand to write, "I love you too. It terrifies me how much." Xavier read her words, his expression transforming with joy. He drew her gently into his arms, holding her as if she were infinitely precious. "We'll figure it out together," he promised. "However long it takes, whatever challenges come." Christmas Day arrived clear and cold with fresh snow blanketing the landscape in pristine white. The sleigh from town arrived mid-morning, bringing Mrs. Holloway, Reverend Thomas, Harold, and several other townspeople for the celebration. The house filled with warmth and laughter as Mrs. Guthrie served a magnificent feast. Sophia found herself at the center of a community that had come to accept her completely, silence and all. Several times throughout the day, she caught Xavier watching her with an expression of such tenderness that it made her heart swell. After dinner, at the Reverend's encouragement, Sophia played the piano while everyone gathered around to sing carols. Though she couldn't join in vocally, she felt more a part of the celebration than she would have thought possible. As twilight fell and the guests prepared to depart, Xavier drew Sophia aside into his study. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small package from his desk drawer. Sophia unwrapped it carefully to reveal a beautifully crafted silver locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny painting of the Double V Ranch on one side. "The other side is empty," Xavier explained, "for whatever future memory you wish to preserve." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. She reached for her notebook. "It's beautiful, perfect, thank you." Xavier helped her fasten it around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin. "There's something else I wanted to ask you," he said, his voice suddenly nervous. "Something I've been considering for weeks." Sophia looked at him questioningly. "I know it's soon. I know you value your independence and have every reason to be cautious." He took a deep breath. "But I love you, Sophia Pierce, and I want to build a life with you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening, it revealed a delicate gold ring with a single perfect diamond. "Will you marry me? Not immediately, whenever you're ready, but I wanted you to know that's where my heart is heading." Sophia stared at the ring, a flood of emotions overwhelming her. Fear, joy, disbelief, hope all battled within her heart. She had come to Cooper's Ridge to hide, to disappear into anonymity. Instead, she had found a man who saw her completely and loved what he saw. With trembling fingers, she wrote, "Are you certain? A wife who cannot speak, who may never speak again." Xavier's response was immediate and firm. "I don't love you despite your silence, Sophia. I love all of you exactly as you are. Your notebook, your expressive eyes, your music, your courage. I don't need to hear your voice to know your heart." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she wrote, "Then yes, yes, I will marry you." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of all the joy to come. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Cooper's Ridge. To Sophia's surprise and gratitude, the community's response was overwhelmingly positive. Mrs. Holloway immediately appointed herself unofficial wedding planner, while Reverend Thomas offered counsel and support. They decided on a spring wedding, when travel would be easier for guests from neighboring communities. In the meantime, Sophia continued her work at the Mercantile whenever weather permitted travel to town, splitting her time between the boarding house and the ranch. Her piano playing improved daily as she practiced regularly, often with Xavier beside her learning simple melodies. Music became their shared language, complementing the written words and silent understanding that formed the foundation of their relationship. February brought a devastating blizzard that isolated the ranch for nearly 2 weeks. During this time, Xavier fell ill with a high fever that reminded Sophia painfully of the illness that had taken his first wife and child. For 3 terrifying days, she and Mrs. Guthrie worked tirelessly to bring his temperature down, applying cold compresses and forcing liquids whenever possible. On the 3rd night, when his fever finally broke, Sophia collapsed in tears beside his bed. The fear of losing him had brought home just how completely he had become the center of her world. When Xavier opened his eyes to find her there, exhausted and tearful, he reached weakly for her hand. "Still here," he murmured, "not leaving you." Sophia pressed his hand to her cheek in wordless gratitude. In that moment, something shifted inside her, a loosening of the tight band that had constricted her throat since the fire. She opened her mouth, willing sound to emerge, but nothing came. Xavier understood without explanation. "It will come when it's ready," he assured her, "or it won't. Either way, we're fine." As spring approached, wedding preparations intensified. Sophia ordered a dress from Denver, and Xavier arranged for friends from as far as Helena and Virginia City to attend. The Double V Ranch would host the celebration, with temporary accommodations constructed for the numerous guests expected. 2 weeks before the wedding, as Sophia practiced at the piano one evening, she found herself humming softly along with the melody, a sound so unexpected she stopped playing abruptly. Xavier, who had been reading nearby, looked up. "What's wrong?" he asked. Sophia touched her throat, eyes wide with disbelief. She tried again, focusing intently, and produced a soft, raspy hum. Xavier was beside her in an instant. "Sophia, was that?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. Carefully, she opened her mouth and forced out a whisper barely audible, painfully hoarse, but undeniably her voice. "Xavier." His name, the first word she had spoken in nearly a year. Xavier's eyes filled with tears as he gathered her into his arms. "Don't strain," he cautioned, though his voice shook with emotion. The doctor said it might return gradually, if at all. Over the following days, Sophia worked carefully to reclaim her voice. It was weak, often failing entirely, and speaking for more than a few minutes left her throat raw and painful. But it was returning word by word, sentence by sentence. By their wedding day, she could speak in short phrases, though she still relied on her notebook for extended communication. She had kept her progress relatively private, sharing it only with Xavier, Mrs. Guthrie and Mrs. Holloway. For their wedding, she had one particular goal in mind. The ceremony itself was everything they had hoped, simple but meaningful, surrounded by friends who had become family. Sophia wore her cream-colored gown with Xavier's locket at her throat and wildflowers in her hair. Xavier, resplendent in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on Reverend Thomas's arm. When it came time for their vows, Xavier spoke his with clear conviction, promising to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of their lives. When it was Sophia's turn, a hush fell over the gathering. Most expected her to write her vows for the Reverend to read. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice raspy but determined, each word carefully formed. I, Sophia, take you, Xavier, to be my husband. I promise to love you, support you, and cherish every day we are blessed to share. You found me in silence and taught me to speak again with my eyes, with my hands, with my heart. Whatever voice I have belongs to you. There wasn't a dry eye among the guests as Xavier, overcome with emotion, kissed his bride before the Reverend gave permission. Their celebration lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and more joy than the Double V Ranch had seen in years. Later, when they were finally alone in the master bedroom that was now theirs to share, Xavier held Sophia close. Your vows were the most beautiful gift, he said softly. But you should know, even if your voice had never returned, I would have heard you just as clearly. Sophia smiled, tracing his features with gentle fingers. I know, she whispered. That's why I found my voice again, because you heard me even in the silence. Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons. Sophia's voice strengthened gradually, though it never fully returned to what it had been before the fire. She maintained her position at the mercantile, expanding the business considerably with her sharp accounting skills and innovative ideas. Xavier's ranch prospered under their joint management. Sophia's head for numbers complemented his practical knowledge of cattle and land, creating a partnership that extended far beyond their personal relationship. A year after their wedding, their first child was born, a son they named Samuel, after Xavier's faithful foreman who had stood with them through everything. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth. Both children grew up surrounded by music. As Sophia made sure the piano remained the heart of their home, Cooper's Ridge itself grew and changed around them. The railroad eventually came through, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Through it all, Xavier and Sophia remained central figures in the community, he as a respected rancher and eventual town councilman. She as the mercantile's owner following Harold Holloway's retirement. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Sophia leaned against Xavier's shoulder. You ever think about how unlikely our meeting was? She asked, her voice still carrying that distinctive raspy quality that had become so dear to him. All the circumstances that had to align, even the fire. Xavier took her hand, running his thumb over the wedding band that had never left her finger. I think some people are meant to find each other, whatever obstacles life puts between them. Even silence, especially silence. He smiled, kissing her temple. It taught me to listen with more than my ears to hear what truly matters. Sophia turned her face to his, the love in her eyes as eloquent as it had been that first day in Cooper's Ridge when she had no voice at all. I love you, Xavier Vance. And I love you, Sophia Vance. Every word, every silence, every moment between. As the sun set over the Montana landscape they both called home, they sat together in companionable quiet, their love speaking volumes in the peaceful silence they shared.